everyone. So our team is going to be discussing the ideas supporting the development of the Shikra model that introduces referential dialogue to training multimodal LLMs. So we're going to be giving you an overview of the model, introducing referential dialogue, and also talking about the architecture of Shikra, and then talking about some of the analysis done by the authors, and then some limitations and conclusions. So what is the motivation behind Shikra? Well, it was found that multimodal LLMs do not perform well when it comes to tasks that involve specifying a particular object in an image. So being able to embed this positional representation into a model training will help it perform referential dialogue. How are these position representations embedded into the model? The authors were able to accomplish this by using normal numerical bounding boxes and center point coordinates to represent them, and fed them as tokens to the model to learn, to the LLM to learn during training. So an example of this would be in this case where a user is asking Shikra, what is this man here? We see this man here with providing the coordinate bounding boxes. What is this man afraid of? And Shikra is able to respond saying that, specifying the bounding box also, that this man is afraid of the chicken, which is here in this green bounding box, saying it's flying towards the man. So in a more concrete sense, what is referential dialogue? So it is being able to specify particular objects. So here we see a user wants to compare between two deers in an image, and it provides, as we had said, they're able to provide bounding box representations for objects in an image. So it is able to provide the bounding box representation between these two deers and wants to get a difference between them. And Shikra is also able to explain in depth that the changes between these two deers is their size and the size of their antler, and is also able to expand its vocabulary to other objects that were not specifically mentioned, like in this case, the antlers, which it says is larger on the large deer. So moving on, some of the applicable areas of Shikra would be in mixed reality headsets, where you'd be having more fine-grained conversations with your AI assistant to help you, or in human robotics interactions, where wanting to specify more detailed operations for the robots, and in the retail consumer space, where a user would like to specify particular objects of choice to purchase. So So the authors, they wanted to revalidate their observation that current multimodal LLMs do not perform well with specifying objects. So they did this using the chessboard test, where an image is split up into four 2x2 images, and the model is asked to specify which quadrant of the image the particular object is. And it is found that the accuracy test of current multimodal LLMs is comparable to doing a random select. So here we see an image where the model is split into the 4 quadrants, and then with the cake, and it has to specify what parts. So an important part of the Shikra model is these embedding chain of thoughts reasoning with positional representation. So chain of thoughts can be said to be an intermediate reasoning process that is provided into the LLM to help it understand the reasoning to an answer. So for this example here, we can see in a normal standard prompting case, a user would provide a question to the model, and then provide an answer. And then the model is provided with a similar question, and then we see that the model is not able to come to the final answer of the reasoning. But in a chain of thoughts procedure, after the question is provided to the model, the answer, there's an intermediate reasoning process that is provided in the answer here, where it says Roger started with 5 balls, and 2 cans of balls has 3 tennis, which is 6 balls, which adds up to 11. So when the model is given a similar kind of process, question to answer, it is able to apply a similar kind of reasoning So that is chain of thought. But in this case, for Shikra, the chain of thought process is embedded with positional representation. So what are referential dialogue tasks in particular? One of them is the referring expression comprehension that takes an image and a prompt to describe the image, and then it provides the bounding boxes for the image. The prompt is usually a descriptive prompt telling about a particular object, and the model is able to provide a bounding box around this object. So here we see the user is asking about a particular dessert, which is vanilla in this case, and has a cashew nose, and the model is able to provide the bounding box. The next task is the spotting captioning task that involves taking also an image, but then in this case, a more open-ended prompt. So, and which is usually just asking the model to describe what it sees in the view. The model is able to describe the scene, also providing bounding boxes to describe the scene of the objects it sees. So here we see spot captioning task where the user simply asks Shikra to describe, and it just gives bounding boxes as it's describing each object in the image. And also for referring expression generation here, we're given an image with bounding boxes, but in this case, it is more discriminated where it defines only the object that is within the bounding boxes. So here we see the baby that is in this blue bounding box here, and the model is able to specify just that child. And then finally, we have the point QA task that uses either point coordinates or bounding box coordinates to specify in an image, and then to get particular answers regarding those coordinate points. So here we see that there are 2 points here, the red point and the purple point, and the model is asked what the color of the cushion on the purple point is, purple point coordinates, and we see that it is green. And similarly with the red cushion coordinate points, it shows that. For the bounding box coordinates, we see that here we have these bounding boxes here around the balloons of the cake. And then when the model is asked what the color of the frosting is on the orange bounding box, it's able to answer that it's blue. And similarly for all the other colors of the bounding boxes, it's able to do that for the point QA task. So we're going to be talking about the Shikra architecture now.
Thank you, Rafiq. So I'm going to briefly cover the Shikra architecture as well as the training process and some of the data sets and task templates that they use. So for the architecture, let's say we have an input image and we pass it through a VIT large model, get some visual embeddings, and we basically then pass it through a fully connected layer, which converts them into dimensions which can be basically input into the LLM. So I'm going to show this real quick. So this is like, for example, the input text passes through the tokenizer, you get textual tokens, and then you basically interject the image tokens with the textual tokens. So they're not being passed like within like as you saw previously in a cross mechanism, mechanism. These are just being input just like normal textual tokens into the LLM model. So yeah, so there's 2 main components, and these fully connected layer and the Vicuna LLM are basically the trainable components. The VIT is frozen, and if that's about it. And for the data sets, they have like there's 2 types of data sets. There's the public reorganized public data sets. I'm going to talk a bit more about these, and then there's the Shikra RD dataset, which is a referential dialogue specific dataset that they created using another dataset called the Flickr 30K entities dataset. So for the public dataset, it's basically just normal simple tasks, VQA, conventional basically vision language tasks, captioning, REG, REC like Rafiq just talked about, and point QA. And for the Shikra RD dataset, how they basically generate this is basically they have the Flickr 30K dataset has 5 objects per each image, and for each object there's a description and a corresponding bounding box, and they basically pass this information down to the GPT-4 model and have it generate a pair of question and answers. And this pair of question and answer, each pair basically comprises of one training instance. So that's how they basically create their RD specific data set. And the model training part is basically split into two stages. So in the first stage, they basically do 100,000 steps over the public data set, which is 1.5 epoch of the whole data set. And then in the second stage, they basically train over RD specific data set, referential dialogue specific data set, just to fine tune it. And with like a 50% sampling ratio, 50% of it is the public data set. And yeah, in both stages, as we talked about before, the VIT model is frozen, and the purpose of this two-stage process is to basically fine tune to first learn conventional vision language tasks in the first stage, and then to fine tune it on referential dialogue specific tasks. So yes, like overview of the tasks and data sets. So the tasks were explained previously, and these are their corresponding data sets. And this airstrike basically means that these data sets were basically trained on in the second stage. And yes, so for the templates, they were like just since there's 9 different tasks, they basically created multiple different templates for each task, and yeah, these templates that talk about are just only used for training purposes. Don't need to have that format for natural language. So you can just for inference, you can just use your own natural language. Don't have to stick to the template. And to ensure this, they basically used hundreds of different templates, variations of a template generated for each task using a GPT-4 model, just to make sure that the model is generalized, and to introduce some variance. And so yeah, briefly going over the task template for different tasks. So this is simple captioning task. You basically, and this image tag basically is where the image tokens go when, as we saw in the previous architecture slide. So this text, these text tokens and this image tokens here, and then text tokens again. So like, and yeah, this is the spotting captioning task. Basically, just have the model provide bounding box coordinates or point coordinates alongside the description of the image. And this is basically grounding captioning, where you basically provide it with the model with, and this OBJ is basically just the bounding box coordinates from the dataset. And this is for IEG, you basically provide it with the image, and it's basically more discriminative version where you, and this is simple question answering VQA. And yeah, this is the IEC task. And yeah, for the chain of thought process, as Rafi explained it earlier, they basically introduced a new concept where basically with chain of thought, basically also have the model include points or the bounding boxes, course, like when it's reasoning about the task. So these are templates corresponding to. And now we'll talk a bit about the experiments and the evaluation.
Okay. Thanks, Mohad. So first, I'm going to talk about a couple of experiments that Zoc performed, and then after that, I'll get to the actual evaluation of the model. So the first of these experiments was to evaluate the effect of incorporating positional information into the chain of thoughts process. So the way the authors actually went about doing this is while the model is producing its reasoning for its answer in the chain of thoughts process, anytime it references a specific object or region in the image it's talking about, it has to provide a center point annotation for that object or region. So they refer to this as grounding chain of thought because it grounds the reasoning process in the actual visual information. So to perform this experiment, they took a Shikra 7 billion parameter model and trained it strictly on the Clever data set. And they chose this data set because it's actually pretty intensive in terms of reasoning, or the amount of reasoning or explanation it takes to answer a question. Here you can see an example question and image pair, where if you think about what you'd have to do to answer this, it would actually take a lot of explaining. So to perform this experiment, they first calculated the baseline, where given the question, they answer it without providing any reasoning. After that, they evaluated it while incorporating chain of thought. So the model was required to explain its answer. And you can see there's a huge drop in accuracy here. And this can be attributed to hallucinations, where the model refers to objects or regions that aren't actually present. And then finally, when they incorporate the chain of thoughts with the center point annotation, you can see the accuracy rises by a lot, not only above the chain of thoughts approach, but above the original approach. So what the authors discover here is that by incorporating positional information and visual information inside the reasoning process, you get higher quality answers in fighting against object hallucinations. So the next experiment performed is a comparison between ways to represent position. So the first way that you can represent positions is using custom vocabularies. You actually saw an example of this on the chessboard test slide, where the image was split into 4, and the custom vocabulary there would be top left, top right, bottom left, and bottom right. However, in the implementation the authors used for this experiment, they use this bin verbiage. So the image would be split into bin 0 through bin 1000 to refer to different regions. And they compared that with what Shikra actually uses, which is the numerical representations of bounding boxes and center points. So to perform this experiment, they took Shikra and trained it only on referring expression comprehension data sets, and then evaluated on these referring expression comprehension data sets listed here. First, you can see the results for the custom vocabulary approach. And here you can see the results for the numerical approach, where it consistently outperforms the vocabulary approach. All right, so now that we've covered those 2 experiments, I'd like to move on to evaluation of the model. The first task they evaluate on is the referring expression comprehension task, where they measure the prediction accuracy of bounding boxes. To convert bounding boxes from an IOU to an accuracy, they take the IOU of the predicted bounding box and the ground truth, and if it exceeds 0.5, then it's considered a true positive. So here they're comparing Shikra against other generalist visual language models that achieve state-of-the-art performance. And what they mean by generalist is models capable of a wide array of tasks. And if you look here, you can see that Shikra 7B and Shikra 13B consistently outperform on every data set except the GRIP benchmark. You can also see that between Shikra 7B and Shikra 13B, there's hardly any gain in performance. So what that means is you can use half as many parameters about without losing any performance, which is pretty impressive. They also compared themselves to specialist models, which are trained specifically for this task of referring expression comprehension. And you can see that the Shikra models, while they get outperformed by these specialist models, they're actually closer in performance to a specialist model than they are a generalist model, while maintaining the generalist properties of being able to do more than just this task. Moving on to evaluation on point QA, they evaluate this on 2 data sets, the first of which is Visual 7W, which is a multiple choice question answer data set. They specifically use the which box setting. So the 4 choices provided are bounding boxes instead of traditional multiple choice options. And here you can see that Shikra achieves new state-of-the-art performance, outperforming what was previously state-of-the-art. The next data set they use is the point QA look twice data set. Now this comprises of referential questions. So questions like what color is this, or how many of these are there, where the this and these is referred to by either a center point annotation or a bounding box. The authors focus specifically on the how many type of questions though, so counting questions. So for example, and I'm going to use this example throughout the rest of this explanation, how many apples are there? So you can see here there's a split of pronoun, superclass, and class, because there are different levels of detail that can be provided within the question. So what the pronoun split refers to is that instead of saying how many apples, it would say how many of these are there, because you remove the information of telling the model that is an apple. For the superclass split, instead of saying how many of these, you would say how many of fruits. So you're providing slightly more information while still not telling it directly that there's an apple. And finally, for the class split, you would say how many apples are there, like in the original example. So here's Shikra evaluated against the baseline model proposed in the point QA look twice paper, where it handily outperforms using center point annotations, and that continues using bounding box annotations. Furthermore, they evaluated on traditional visual language tasks, such as image captioning and visual question answering. Here they use the Shikra 13 billion parameter model. First, I'll show the results for visual question answering. And once again, you can see Shikra achieved state-of-the-art or near state-of-the-art for all splits of VQA V2. On OK VQA, it gets outperformed by a couple of models, but that can be attributed to the data sets used, as OK VQA is a data set where the questions focus on having outside knowledge. However, for captioning, you can see that Shikra once again outperforms almost every model it's compared to. So the last metric they evaluate on is a metric measuring object hallucination using POPE. And we've talked about object hallucination a lot, so I'd like to cover exactly how this is evaluated. So suppose you're given this image here of an umbrella at the beach. An old or standard way of evaluating this is you would task the model to provide a detailed description, and then you check the description for any hallucinations. Like here, you see a person is mentioned, but there's no person here at the beach anywhere. So what POPE does is, instead of using this description approach, it polls the model directly using these various settings. So here in this random setting, you can see the object is directly asked, is there a tree in the image? And what is meant by random is it takes the entire set of objects throughout the data set you're using to evaluate, removes any objects that are present in the image, and chooses one at random to ask the question about. So there's no tree here in the image, but trees are present somewhere in the data set, so it asks about a tree. Next, there's a popular setting to ask questions about. So what popular does, instead of using any absent objects and choosing, it ranks them in terms of how frequently they occur in the data set outside of this image and asks a question about that object. So here, since it's asking about a person, you can assume that person is a frequently occurring class in the data set that is not present in this image. Lastly, there's an adversarial setting where, instead of only being concerned with popular objects, they are objects that are popular relative to the objects that are present. So what that means is that, given you have this object, an umbrella, instead of only caring about how frequently an object occurs in the data set, it is how frequently that object occurs alongside an umbrella. So for example, a boat might show up frequently with an umbrella on the beach due to its similarity in terms of the scenes they'd be common in. So using that set of questions and those set of settings, they evaluate the rate at which Shikra hallucinates objects or can successfully identify objects that are present. So you can see here in the random setting, where it's not trying to actively trick the model or abuse it getting lazy and relying on patterns, Shikra gets outperformed by instruct blip, but I'd like to call attention to this yes metric. This measures how frequently the model says yes to questions both about objects that are hallucinated or objects that are actually present. And you can see that Shikra is pretty discriminatory and willing to say no more often than the rest of the data sets. This becomes more relevant when we move on to the popular setting, where the questions are now intentionally trying to abuse models that seek to find patterns instead of actually using the image content. Here you can see that Shikra is now outperforming instruct blip and all the rest of the models, and its yes percentage has not increased by nearly as much as the others. And now moving on to the adversarial setting, you can see instruct blip compared to the random setting, its performance has dropped significantly, while Shikra still maintains quality performance. So now that we've covered all the evaluations and experiments, I'd like to talk about some of the limitations of the model. First, it still has an LLM component, which means it still has the common LLM issues. It is susceptible to any biases that can be induced by the training data. And additionally, it may provide misinformation in the form of answering questions incorrectly or telling you something that's otherwise untrue. Additionally, since we've mentioned that the numerical representation gets encoded as text, if you have a large number of decimal places to that numerical representation or calculating the bounding boxes for a large number of objects, tokenizing that can become computationally expensive. And lastly, the model is not capable of segmentation. So in conclusion, we have presented the Shikra model, which is a multimodal large language model that excels at interpreting positional information. And it is a generalist visual language model capable of a large number of tasks, and it performs competitively with specialized models. And lastly, the authors have sort of expounded upon this new line of research where the incorporation of visual information can be valuable for reducing object hallucinations in multimodal large language